Jasper Green's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm sorry," as the static swallowed his words whole, leaving only the wet drip, drip, drip. Drip. That echoed from the station's frozen vents. My gloved hand trembled against the cardboard box, the cold seeping through the leather. It felt wrong, too heavy for its size, like a sack of wet earth. I tore it open. The lid split with a sound like dry leaves, skittering on ice. Inside, a heart pulsed. Warm, wet, beating against the lab's frostbitten floor. I touched it. The rhythm synced with my own pulse, a terrifying echo in my chest. The organ's surface was slick, glistening with a thin film that smelled faintly of copper and something older, like sun-bleached bone. I could feel its frantic throb through my gloves, a vibration that traveled up my arm into my ribs. The radio crackled again, a distorted whisper. "I'm sorry," before dissolving into the slow, wet, feathered drip, drip, drip of melting ice from the ceiling vent. The sound wasn't just in the air, it was inside my skull, a physical pressure behind my eyes. I patted my coat lining, the fabric stiff with cold. My fingers brushed something unnaturally heavy, embedded deep within the wool, the golden coin. It felt like a stone in my pocket now, cold and sharp. The station's Polaroid blue walls seemed to bleed into my vision, the faded color leaching into the corners of my eyes. The air crackled with static electricity, making my hair stand on end, a low hum like the distorted hiss of the wind outside. I could taste the copper tang of the organ still, the metallic residue on my tongue. I knelt, the cold floor biting through my trousers. The heart's rhythm deepened, syncing with the drip, drip, drip. From the vent above, it felt alive, aware. I pressed my palm flat against its surface. The warmth was intense, almost feverish, spreading up my arm like a slow, wet infection. The organ pulsed in time with my own heartbeat, a sickening harmony. I could feel the tiny, irregular contractions beneath my fingers, the delicate tissue stretching and relaxing with each beat. The sound of the Sumbai drip, drip, drip seemed to intensify, the water droplets hitting the floor with a heavier, wetter swing-plink that vibrated through the station's metal grates. My breath fogged in the air, each exhale a small, visible cloud. The Polaroid blue walls seemed to darken, the faded color bleeding into the shadows. The radio's static hummed like a distorted heartbeat, a constant, low thrum that matched the organ's rhythm. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, heavy and labored, right into my ear. The air smelled of damp wool and the faint, cloying sweetness of the organ's warmth. I looked down at my hand, the gloved fingers still pressed against the pulsing heart. The coin in my coat lining felt heavier than ever, its edges sharp against the fabric. I pulled my hand away. The organ's beat slowed slightly, then resumed its frantic rhythm. The drip, drip, drip. Dafty continued, steady, relentless. I reached into my coat lining, my fingers closing around the coin. It felt unnaturally warm now, the metal hot against my skin. I tugged it free, the fabric tearing slightly. The coin was embedded in the wool, its surface cold, its edges sharp. I held it up, the golden metal glinting in the dim light. The drip, drip, drip was louder now, filling the room. I shifted the coin in my palm, the edges scraping against my skin. The coin's edge slipped through the fabric of my coat lining, into the flesh of my palm. The metal bit into my skin, a sharp, wet sensation. The organ's beat faltered for a second, then resumed, matching the twined drip, drip, drip. That filled the station. I set the golden coin on the desk, the metal cool against the faded Polaroid blue of the laminate. It didn't clink, didn't ring, just settled. A dull thud, absorbed by the station's tired surfaces. The station's ventilation system groaned a low, metallic sigh. Then it began. Not a sound from the exterior, not the wind whistling through the cracks in the station's hull, but 20 inci dyed my ear. A heavy, wet breathing. Right in the canal. It wasn't the rush of air from my own lungs. This was contained. A slow, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that resonated against my eardrum. A physical pressure. I turned my head, scanning the cramped lab, the rows of frosted instruments, the peeling wallpaper. Nothing. The station's lights flickered, a subtle pulse that mirrored the breathing's cadence. I pressed a finger to my ear, expecting moisture, expecting something. My fingertip came away slick, warm, viscous. I brought it to my vision, the faint glow of the station's lamps illuminating the residue. Not blood, not wax. Something. Organic. A thin, amber smear. I wiped it on my coat, the fabric absorbing the substance. The breathing intensified, the rhythm growing more pronounced. A subtle vibration now traveling through my skull. I leaned closer to the desk, my gaze fixed on the coin. Its surface, usually a dull gold, now reflected the room with unsettling clarity. It wasn't a perfect reflection. Distorted. Like looking into troubled water, my own face stared back, but wrong. A slight asymmetry. A subtle shift in the angle of my jaw. I blinked. The reflection blinked back. Not simultaneously. A fraction of a second delayed. A single cold tear formed at the corner of the reflection's eye, a tiny bead of moisture that tracked down its cheek. The Polaroid blue of the room seemed to deepen, the color leaching into the shadows. The breathing intensified, transforming into a wet, guttural thin huff. Huff. Originating not from my ear but from within my skull. A pressure building behind my eyes, a physical ache in my temples. I ran a hand through my hair, the strands sticking to my damp palm. The air felt heavy, charged with static electricity. The metal of the instruments hummed faintly, a high-pitched whine that blended with the rhythmic phone huff. Huff. I tried to focus on the heart, still pulsing on the floor, but my gaze kept returning to the coin, to the reflection. It wasn't me, not quite. The eyes were the same color, but lacked the weariness, the cynicism. They were expectant. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the surface of the desk. The full huff, huff, grew louder. Now a rasping sound like wet lungs struggling for air. I could feel it now, not just hear it. A vibration in my teeth, a tremor in my jaw. The coin's surface was slick with condensation, the reflected image wavering. I traced the outline of my reflection's face with my fingertip. The glass felt strangely warm. The tear at the corner of its eye hadn't moved. It remained suspended, a perfect sphere of moisture. The station groaned, the metal hull flexing under some unseen pressure. The foof, huff, huff, resonated through my bones, a deep, primal rhythm. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out. But it was inside me. Inside my head, inside my chest, I pressed my hands to my temples, trying to contain the pressure. When I opened my eyes, the reflection was closer, leaning forward. Its lips parted in a slow, silent smile. The tear finally fell, leaving a dark, wet streak on its cheek. The air tasted of copper. The breathing was all that remained, a wet, guttural fun huff, huff, that echoed the frantic beat of the heart on the floor. A rhythm that was becoming my own. The coin was radiating heat, a burning sensation against my skin. The reflection's eyes locked onto mine. It was no longer a reflection. It was Sud watching. The station's ventilation hissed like a dying breath, each exhalation thick with the scent of frozen metal and something older, something that clung to the back of my throat and tasted like rust in childhood. My fingers twitched toward the pocket where the coin should have been, but it wasn't there. The fabric clung to my leg, damp and heavy, as if the pocket itself had been stitched from the same moss that coated the cat now crouched by the window. It didn't move at first, just sat there, a lump of damp earth and fur. The dead crow's neck twisted in its jaws. The glass between us was a vein of ice, clouded with frost but clear enough to see the cat's ribs pressing against its skin, each breath a shallow push of air through its gills. The crow's wings were still, stiff as branches, but its beak. Oh, God, its beak was open just enough to let the cold air in. A slow hissy escaped, not from the bird's throat, but from the gap where its tongue should have been. The cat's tongue didn't move. It didn't need to. I knelt, the floor groaning under my weight, the sound like old wood splitting. The cat's ears twitched, not toward me but toward the window. The glass was black with frost, but I could see the way it breathed, a faint condensation forming in the cracks, the ice weeping like tar. The crow's neck snapped with a sound that wasn't just a crack, but a foo puppy like a twig snapping underfoot, but wetter, slicker, the way bone breaks when it's already half rotted. The bird's eyes flickered open, not the black of death, but a dull, waterlogged gray, like the bottom of a pond. The cat didn't look at me. It looked at the crow. I reached out, my fingers brushing the damp fur at its shoulder. The texture wasn't fur. Not anymore. It was side-growth, soft, spongy, the way lichen clings to stone after years of neglect. Soil clung to it like a second skin, gritty and cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The cat's flank was slick where it rubbed against my ankle, the moss parting just enough to reveal the cat's skin underneath. Pale stretched too tight over something moving beneath it. The coin was gone, not stolen, not dropped, gone. And in its place a weight that wasn't metal, wasn't gold, but something organic, something that pulsed faintly against my thigh. I didn't need to look to know it was moss. The same moss that coated the cat, the same moss that smelled like the bottom of a swamp, like the first rains after a drought. The air tasted of it now too, earth and decay. The copper tang of old pennies left too long in the dirt. The cat's eyes were the color of a bruise that's already faded. The blue so pale it was almost transparent, like ice over a deep well. They didn't blink. They didn't need to. The crow's beak twitched, and then a sound. Not a cry. Not a breath. A suck. Deep and wet, like the moment before a vacuum seal breaks, like the last gasp of air from a lung that's been holding it for too long. The cat's head jerked up, its mouth open, but not to speak, to foot-take. The coin was gone from my pocket, but something else was there now, a weight, a pressure, the feeling of the cat's tongue dragging across my skin, not in hunger, but in twin claiming. The crow's feathers ruffled, not from the wind, from fin inside. The cat's paws flexed, digging into the frost, and the crow's neck arched back, its beak snapping shut with a sound like a wet kiss. The cat's eyes glowed for a single flickering second, not blue, not green, but the color of a flame just before it gutters out. Faded. Wrong. The crow's wing trembled, not from the cold, from fun life. A single feather detached itself from the bird's chest, drifting down like a leaf in slow motion, but it didn't fall. It hovered. The cat's breath hitched, a sound like a stone skipping over water, and the feather quivered, then twitched. The crow's beak opened again, wider this time. The edges glistening, not with blood, but with something thicker, something that glowed faintly in the dim light, a pulse, a heartbeat, a tiny funrong, organ suspended in the dark. It wasn't a heart. It was a foot seed, and it was Swen breathing. The brick wall loomed before me, a solid slab of red clay and ancient mortar, that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the station's frosted windows. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing but silence met me. Not even the echo of my own heartbeat could penetrate this fortress. But then again, neither had my fist when I'd pounded on its surface moments ago. I raised my hand, fingers curling like claws around an imaginary brick. Fuffod. The impact sent a vibration through my arm up to my shoulder, settling into my bones with a weight of unspoken words. Still nothing, not even a crack in this monolith's aid. Yet there it was again, the faintest hint of sound, barely perceptible but undeniably present, a thin cry trapped behind stone and mortar. I leaned closer, pressing my ear harder against the cold surface. Cry. This time, there was no mistaking it. The wail of a child cut short by stone walls and ancient secrets. I felt it more than heard it, a dull thud against my eardrums that resonated in my chest like an echo trapped inside me. My breath fogged the brickwork before me as I stepped back, examining the wall with newfound determination. The cry had come from here, from this very spot, and I intended to find out why and how it was possible for sound to travel through solid stone without so much as a crack or fissure in its surface. I picked up my tool bag, the canvas rough against my fingers. It held all manner of useful implements, screwdrivers, pliers, a small pry bar, and most importantly, my hammer. Its weight was comforting in my hand, familiar like an old friend despite the grim task at hand. I raised it high above my head and brought it down hard on the wall. Crack. The sound echoed through the station's empty corridors, followed by silence. The kind of heavy silence that feels almost alive with anticipation or dread, or perhaps both. But there was no sign of damage. Not even a scratch marred the surface beneath where I'd struck. Yet still, something felt different, tense, like the air before thunder breaks. I raised my hammer again and brought it down harder this time. Crack. Again, nothing but unyielding brick, but then a faint gasp of breath on stone, or was that just wishful thinking? Another blow, and another crack. This one echoed differently somehow, deeper, more resonant, as if the wall itself had taken a shuddering breath before expelling it in protest at my intrusion. And there a thin line ran vertically down the brick where I'd struck. Not quite a fissure yet, but close enough to encourage me onward. My heart pounded wildly against my ribs as adrenaline surged through me, heightening every sensation. The cold bite of winter on exposed skin, the metallic tang of fear coating my tongue like rust, even the weighty thud of blood pulsing behind my eyes. I struck again. Crack. And another line appeared beside the first. The mortar between them began to crumble, trickling downwards in wet, sun-bleached parchment, like flakes that clung stubbornly to the wall before finally tumbling loose onto the floor below with a soft timplop peen. I reached out tentatively, fingers brushing against rough brick and powdery debris. My heart raced faster now, anticipation building within me like steam pressure in an old boiler, ready to blow at any moment. But I needed more than just cracks. I needed access. So once again, I raised my hammer high above my head. A sudden-to-be scream pierced the air behind me, a raw, primal cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station itself, and sent ice surging through my veins despite the sweat beading on my brow. I spun around, breath ragged in my chest as I searched for its source. Nothing but empty corridors stretched out before me, no sign of life save for myself reflected back at me from countless polished surfaces. Yet still, that cry echoed inside my head like a trapped animal clawing desperately to escape. It took several long seconds before the sound finally faded away into silence once more, but not before leaving behind an eerie hissy that seemed to linger in every corner of this godforsaken place, growing louder with each passing moment until it felt almost tangible against my skin, like static electricity building up just beneath the surface, ready to strike at any given second. And then, as if on cue, a single drop of water fell from above, striking me squarely between the shoulder blades. Another followed shortly after, landing near my foot, the beginning of a slow, steady drip that seemed synchronized perfectly with each ragged breath I took, as fear gripped tighter around my heart than any vice ever could. I turned back to face the wall once more and gasped aloud at what lay revealed before me, not just another crack, but an entire section missing altogether, as if someone or something had taken a bite out of it, leaving behind nothing but jagged edges and gaping darkness beyond. The mortar within was damp, not merely moistened by time or condensation, but wet like fresh blood pumped from a wound still oozing in spite of itself. And there amidst the ruined brickwork lay something else entirely, a single crow feather embedded deep into the earthen wall, its dark plumage pulsing faintly, with an otherworldly glow that seemed to shimmer just beyond my grasp. But it was not this strange ethereal light which held me captive. No, it was what lay behind the vivid feeling of something watching from within the darkness itself. Something old and malevolent lurking there in wait for unsuspecting prey such as myself. And then, a voice crackled through my radio. "I'm sorry." 3 words spoken softly yet carried on heavy waves of static that seemed to ripple across every surface they touched, leaving behind a faint fisifi, not unlike the sound of water dripping steadily into an empty basin, or perhaps something else entirely. As if in response, another drop fell from above, a thick globule of liquid tar, like substance that struck me squarely between the eyes before sliding down my face like tears weeping silently for what was yet to come. I stood there frozen for how long? Minutes, hours, staring into the blackness beyond where only madness awaited, wondering if perhaps it might be better simply to turn away now and leave this place forever behind me. But I knew Sintound, that such an act would not save me. For once seen, there was no escaping what lay hidden within those shadows, and so instead, with trembling hands but steely resolve, I reached out towards that pulsating feather embedded deep into the wall's heart, and prepared myself to face whatever horrors awaited me on the other side. The coin felt cold against my palm, a weight disproportionate to its size. It wasn't the gold itself that registered the chill, but something deeper, something radiating from the surface, a vacuum of warmth. I turned it over, the familiar worn engraving of a child's face staring back. Not a fairy face, not exactly. A ghost of her, a composite of every child I'd ever known, every child I'd ever failed. My reflection mirrored the gesture, but it wasn't in a polished surface. It was Sundafi in the coin itself. A distorted echo, a funhouse mirror pressed against the metal. The light didn't bounce off, it seemed to sink in, swallowed by a depth that shouldn't exist. The air around the coin hummed, a low thrum that resonated in my teeth. He was smiling. My reflection. A slow, deliberate curve of the lips that didn't match the ache in my own jaw. It was a pitying smile, the kind you give to a trapped animal, or a broken toy. Then, the reaching, a subtle elongation of his fingers, stretching beyond the confines of the coin's surface, as if attempting to breach the barrier between realities. They weren't reaching for the knee, but tava knee, but tougher towards something beyond. A yearning, a desperate grasp. The scent hit me then, ozone, sharp and metallic, overlaid with the sickly sweetness of overripe fruit. My stomach lurched. I fought the urge to drop the coin, to fling it into the void, but a force subtle yet undeniable held my hand in place. "Ilera?" The sound was faint, a whisper carried on the static crackling from the radio clipped to my belt. My daughter's name, not her actual voice, but an imitation, a cruel mimicry. It resonated within the coin, within the reflection, within my own skull. The coin's surface began to shift to fee-bubble, not like water but like tar, viscous and black, the surface distorting and reforming with an unsettling fluidity. Each bubble released a puff of that cloying sweetness, coating my tongue with a residue that tasted like regret. His hand moved again, this time closing around my wrist, not a gentle clasp, but a vice. The skin on my arm tightening, the bone beneath protesting with a dull ache. The grip was unexpectedly strong, inhumanly so. I tried to pull away, But the pressure increased, a silent command that bypassed thought and lodged directly in my muscles. The radio's static intensified, morphing into a wet, gurgling sound, like something drowning in thick, black liquid. It pressed against my eardrums, a physical force threatening to rupture the delicate membranes. The room seemed to warp, the familiar geometry of the station blurring at the edges, replaced by a sense of wrongness, of something fundamentally fearful. I saw her then, in the reflection. Not my daughter, not exactly, but a version of her, bathed in a light that wasn't light at all, a luminescence that seemed to emanate from within. She was reaching for me, her face a mask of desperate longing. "Jasper," she breathed, the sound echoing from the coin, from the reflection, from the depths of my own memory. A siren's call. The tar-like substance continued to rise from the coin's surface, a viscous curtain obscuring the space between my world and his. It smelled of decay and something else. Something akin to childhood, but twisted, corrupted, a memory warped into a weapon. He pulled. Not violently, but with a steady, unrelenting force. The grip on my wrist tightened, the pressure becoming almost unbearable. My feet dragged against the icy floor, the resistance futile. The reflection's smile widened, no longer pitying, but triumphant. The world tilted, the station dissolving into a swirling vortex of black and gray. The radio's gurgle reached a crescendo, drowning out all other sound. The scent of overripe fruit became overwhelming, a suffocating blanket. Then, the pull became irresistible. The coin pressed against my palm. The reflection's hand fused with my own. The image of my daughter shimmered, beckoning me onward. And with a final, desperate surge, the reflection's hand grabbed at me, and I was sin-pulled into the mirror. In the mirror world, my doppelganger holds the cat aloft, as if offering it to some unseen deity. The moss clinging to its fur seems to pulsate, a sickening rhythm that echoes in my chest like a second heartbeat. I watch, helpless and horrified, as those damp tendrils begin to slough off, revealing raw, bleeding skin beneath. The cat's pupils contract into pinpricks, swallowing the irises whole. It mewls, a sound like wet parchment tearing, echoing through this twisted version of reality. The air grows heavier, charged with static electricity that makes my hair stand on end and prickles my skin like tiny needles. Each breath is a struggle against the oppressive atmosphere, thick with dread and decay. The doppelganger's grip tightens around the cat, its fingers sinking into flesh until their elbow, deep in fur. The cat's body begins to tremble, shaking off the last remnants of moss. It lands on the icy floor with a sound like cracking ice, reverberating through my bones and setting them aflame. Time seems to slow as I watch my reflection raise its hands above its head, clutching something unseen between them. The cat's body begins to compress, shrinking in on itself like an imploding star. Its fur ripples, shivering with a life of its own until it looks less like an animal and more like liquid darkness given form. The radio clips to my belt crackles to life again, spewing static that sounds suspiciously like the cat's desperate cries for help. The noise grows louder, drowning out all other sound save for the rhythmic drip. Drip, drip of some unknown substance, echoing through this hellish landscape. My doppelganger opens its mouth wide, wider than any human jaw should stretch without breaking. A silent scream escapes from those depths, a visual manifestation of sheer agony that sets my own throat raw with sympathetic pain. Its eyes fade to sun-bleached bone, the whites turning milky and opaque before my very gaze. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stops. The cat's body implodes completely, vanishing without trace or sound save for one final tearing parchment noise that seems to echo forever within this timeless void we're trapped in. The radio crackles once more. "I'm sorry." Those two words hang heavy between us like a guillotine blade ready to drop. Then silence falls again, absolute and deafening. The doppelganger collapses in on itself, crumbling into dust that scatters across the icy floor before being swallowed by shadows. The mirror world seems to hold its breath around me now, waiting for something. Anything. But all I can do is stand here amidst the wreckage of this failed attempt at communication with whatever force controls us both, and wonder what comes next in our endless dance towards madness. The drip echoes through the empty station, a lonely sound that seems to stretch on forever in this frozen wasteland of time and space. I hear it again, louder now, insistent like a heartbeat demanding attention. My hand clenches around the golden coin, its surface fogs with condensation at my touch, as if weeping for what is to come. I run towards the sound, feet crunching on ice that groans beneath me like an ancient beast waking from slumber. The radio clips to my belt crackles intermittently, spewing static that sounds suspiciously like the cat's desperate cries for help. Each burst of noise sets my teeth on edge, sends prickles down my spine as if someone's trailing cold fingers along my vertebrae. The sound leads me deeper into the station, past labs filled with equipment gone silent, and still their digital displays flickering like dying embers. The air grows heavier here, charged with static electricity that makes my hair stand on end and prickles my skin like tiny needles pressing against flesh from within. I pass a room where time seems to have stopped mid-experiment. Petri dishes containing some unknown substance lie abandoned under bright lights, their contents congealing into sickly lumps. The smell hits me then, damp earth and decay, the scent of life turned rotten by this forsaken place. The drip comes again, louder still, echoing off the metal walls like a macabre metronome counting down to some unthinkable end. It is coming from one of the storage rooms at the far end of the hall. I push open the door with more force than necessary. It swings wide on unoiled hinges, revealing another world entirely. This room is different, darker, colder even than Antarctica itself should be. The walls seem to close in around me as I step inside, their shadows writhing like serpents eager to strike. A single light flickers overhead, casting stark shadows that dance grotesquely across the floor. And there, center stage amidst this hellish tableau, lies my cat. Or rather, its corpse does. Its body is a twisted parody of life, limbs splayed out at unnatural angles, fur matted and damp with something. Blood, no too thick for that. It looks more like mud mixed with ichor, clinging to each strand as if trying to claim it for its own. The cat's eyes stare up at me, milky white orbs filled with an accusation I can't quite comprehend. Its mouth hangs open slightly, revealing teeth filed down into jagged points. Not by nature, but by design. Someone did this to my pet, turned him into a weapon meant to tear and rend flesh. And then there is the wound itself, a gaping maw carved deep into its belly where something vital once resided. Now it drips, drip, each drop echoing through the room like a funeral toll. The sound sends shivers down my spine, sets my teeth on edge until they ache. I fall to my knees beside the corpse, reaching out towards it despite every instinct screaming at me not to touch this abomination. My fingers brush against its fur. Damp moss clings to them instantly, hungry tendrils that seem to writhe and twist beneath my skin. My hand moves of its own accord then, guided by some unseen force into the cat's wound. It plunges deep within without resistance, as if welcoming me back home after too long an absence. I feel around inside until my fingertips graze something solid. Cold metal bone. No, it is a coin. Another golden one just like mine, except this time there are words etched onto its surface. I'm sorry. Those two syllables hang heavy between us like a guillotine blade ready to drop, cutting off all escape routes save for madness. My real-world hand reaches through the mirror too now, fingers brushing against my own as they grasp at the cat's corpse. They're slick with blood and something else, something thicker, darker. It coats them completely until it looks like they've been dipped in tar. The radio crackles once more. I'm sorry. Those two words hang heavy between us again now, echoing through this hellish landscape along with the rhythmic drip. Drip drip of some unknown substance that seems to be coming from everywhere, and nowhere all at once. My fingers close around the coin in my cat's wound just as they do so too. We both pull back simultaneously, each holding one half of a whole now, split apart by forces beyond our control or understanding. And then I see it, stitches closing up that gaping maw, binding flesh together again until there is no sign left behind save for the faintest scar. The cat's body shudders once more before collapsing in on itself completely, swallowed by shadows cast long and grotesque across its former likeness. The mirror begins to ripple then, reflections warping as reality tries desperately to reassert control over this twisted parody of existence. But it is too late for that now, isn't it? We've crossed the line between worlds already, stepped through into a realm where nothing makes sense anymore except perhaps pity, and maybe just a little bit of madness. My fingers, still slick with the substance from my cat's wound, now grasp at something else entirely. Hair, my own it seems, has grown long overnight, like verdant moss clinging to my skin. I pluck a strand experimentally, it comes away easily, its tip already sprouting tiny roots and leaves. I bring this strange specimen closer to the light flickering overhead, watching as it writhes in my grasp like some sort of living thing. It is green too now, not just damp moss but actual grass pushing through my pores, growing at an impossible rate until I can feel it tickling against my flesh beneath clothing. My mind races back to that room filled with Petri dishes containing unknown substances. Could this be one such experiment gone awry? Or perhaps something more sinister has taken root within me now? But there is no time for speculation, not when the cat lies before us both dead and alive simultaneously. Its wound gapes open wider still as if inviting me to reach deeper inside once again. And so I do. This time though, instead of metal or bone, my fingers close around something soft yet firm. Flesh, perhaps. But warm too. Too warm for a corpse's embrace, surely. I pull back sharply, clutching the offending item in one hand while the other continues its slow transformation into moss-covered tendrils. It looks like another cat at first glance. Small, furry, even if not quite as damp or earthy smelling as my own feline companion should be. But then I notice how still it remains despite being held aloft mere inches from my face. And those eyes, they're wide open but unseeing behind thick glasses that reflect nothing save for the harsh fluorescent light overhead. These are not the eyes of a living creature. They belong to something else entirely now. Something dead maybe, yet somehow alive still too. The thought sends shivers down my spine despite the heat radiating from this small body cradled within my grasp. My hand moves on its own accord then, guided by some unseen force into stitching up that gaping maw in the cat's belly, using strands of hair turned moss. Each thread sinks deep into flesh until there is nothing left but smooth skin once more. No sign whatsoever remaining behind save for those faint lines, marring perfection like scars etched into marble. But as I watch, those very threads begin to grow again, sprouting tiny roots and leaves that twist around each other, forming intricate patterns reminiscent of vines creeping up walls. They spread rapidly too. Soon they cover not just the cat's wound, but its entire body, until it resembles nothing so much as a verdant corpse buried alive beneath layers upon layers of moss. Then comes sound, not dripping this time, nor even breathing heavy in my ear, but something far worse, hair tree gross ebb. It echoes through me like nails scraping against chalkboard, only amplified tenfold. Each strand grates against bone until I can feel them pushing outward from within, threatening to burst forth at any moment now. And still, it continues. Growing longer, thicker too perhaps, until finally there is no distinction left between my own flesh and this living moss covering me completely head to foot save for the faint blue glow emanating from those Polaroid-colored eyes, staring out at us both accusingly. I fall to knees beside cat corpse again now, hands trembling as they reach towards it despite every instinct screaming not to touch. But how can I resist when everything within me cries out for contact? My fingers brush against its fur. Damp moss clings instantly, hungry tendrils that seem eager to claim ownership over each strand. They writhe beneath my skin too, twisting around one another like snakes preparing to strike. Yet amidst all this chaos, there is something else happening here too. Something familiar yet strange at once. A warmth spreads through me, starting from where our hands meet, then radiating outward until it encompasses every cell and body completely. It feels almost comforting somehow despite everything going on around us, as if maybe, just maybe, we might find some measure of peace amidst all this madness after all. But then the radio crackles again. I'm sorry. Those two words hang heavy between us, now heavier even than before perhaps. They seem to echo through every fiber within me too until there is nothing left but regret and sorrow mingled together into one bitter pill swallowed whole. My gaze shifts from cat corpse back up towards mirror hanging above sink. Reflection staring back at me appears normal enough, still save for those eyes. They glow faded Polaroid blue now, just like the ones belonging to dead creature lying lifeless yet alive beneath my touch. As I watch, cracks begin spreading across surface of golden coin clutched tightly within fist until finally it splits open, completely revealing nothing. No, not nothing exactly, but something else entirely instead. Real cat's dead body behind reflection staring out at me with wide open eyes filled with terror and accusation all rolled into one. And then I realize what those words mean now. I'm sorry. They're an apology sure enough, yet also a warning too maybe. A plea perhaps even. But for whom or what exactly remains unclear until finally the real cat's Siviaceae reflect the coin's crack, glowing softly in that same faded Polaroid blue, as if signaling some silent understanding reached between us both, across time and space itself. The static clung to the air, raising the fine hairs on my arms. Not a painful prickle, but a constant, insistent awareness of something. The fluorescent lights above hummed, a high-pitched whine that seemed to burrow into my skull. I watched my reflection, or what passed for it these days, mimic my movements, a slightly delayed echo of a man I barely recognized. The moss felt cool against my skin, a damp weight that anchored me to this impossible reality. It wasn't growing fufid on I me anymore, not exactly. It tweet was I me. My gaze drifted to the slumped form of the creature, the original anchor, the reason I hadn't dissolved into fractured light and static. Its chest barely rose and fell, a shallow rhythm that felt less like life and more like the last shudder of a dying machine. The air tasted metallic, a faint coppery tang that coated the back of my throat. Then the reflection moved. Not a mirroring of my own action, but a deliberate, independent gesture. Its hand, pale and strangely elongated, reached out and touched the cat. Not a gentle touch, but a forceful shove. The cat didn't resist, didn't even flinch. It simply passed through the wall. The wall wasn't breached, not in the conventional sense. There was no shattering, no crumbling. The cat simply ceased to exist on this side of it, as if the wall wasn't a barrier but a membrane, and the creature had slipped into another layer of existence. A faint, earthy scent followed its passage, a dampness that clung to the cold concrete. Where the cat had been, a spreading stain appeared on the floor. Not a liquid stain, not precisely. It resembled damp earth, a dark, glistening patch of moss and soil that seeped outward, expanding with unsettling speed. It smelled of decay, but not the sharp, acrid stench of rot. This was fertile, alive. I knelt, drawn forward by an irresistible compulsion. The moss-covered floor felt soft, yielding beneath my weight. The stain spread, forming a shallow pool, the color of faded photographs. It wasn't cold. It was lukewarm, almost welcoming. A low, fun plop resonated from the spreading puddle, as more of the moss dripped from the space where the cat had been. My reflection didn't hesitate. It lowered its hand into the puddle, the pale skin disappearing beneath the dark, viscous surface. I felt a corresponding sensation, a chilling wetness spreading across my own hand, even though I hadn't moved. The water, if you could call it that, seemed to pull to find yearn. I watched, paralyzed, as my reflection's fingers began to dissolve. Not into water, not into mud, but into nothing. The skin seemed to unravel, the flesh to loosen and break apart, the bones to soften and yield. It wasn't a violent disintegration, but a gentle unraveling, a slow surrender to the encroaching darkness. A constant twin drip, 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 a code in the room, a morbid metronome counting down the seconds. The sound wasn't merely audible, it resonated within my bones, a physical vibration that shook me to my core. Each drip felt like a loss, a piece of myself being pulled away, absorbed into the spreading stain. I tried to pull my hand back, to sever the connection, but it wouldn't move. It was as if an invisible force held me captive, bound me to this horrifying spectacle. The reflection's hand vanished completely. The water, now a swirling vortex of moss and shadow, continued to spread, reaching for my feet. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something ancient, something buried deep within the frozen wastes. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, a creeping numbness that threatened to engulf me entirely. The room seemed to tilt, to shift, as if the walls were breathing. My vision blurred, the colors fading to the muted tones of a faded Polaroid. The reflection's arm, now just a stump, was the last part of it visible, submerged in the spreading stain. Then the finality. The arm dissolved, the dark water closing over it. No splash, no ripple, just absence. A complete and utter void where a limb had been moments before. The puddle, the stain, the moss-y, all of it. A black hole opening up in the floor, consuming my reflection piece by piece. The drip stopped. The cat lay on the concrete floor, feathers splayed like broken leaves, not scattered, but tufty arranged-eyed, as if placed there by deliberate hands. Its moss-encrusted fur clung to the damp floor, smelling of deep earth and stagnant water. I knelt, my fingers brushing a single feather still warm against my skin. It crumbled at the touch, dry and brittle, leaving dust on my palm. The radio crackled, a sharp foot hiss followed by a voice, thin as old film. "I'm sorry." Not a word, but a vibration in the air, a pressure against my eardrums. I pocketed the feather, its edges scraping my thumb. The coin was already there, cold and smooth in my palm, the one that always returned to my pocket. I didn't think. I just let it go. It slid from my fingers, not falling, but gliding across the floor like a stone on still water. The sound was the softest scrape of metal on concrete, a dry funchous that echoed in the hollow space behind my ribs. It rolled toward the cat's head, the coin's edges catching the faint, sun-bleached light bleeding from the walls. The Polaroid blues of the station faded ghostly, seeped into the floor beneath me, turning the concrete to something older, something sun-bleached and bone-white. The air tasted like copper and dust. The coin stopped at the cat's mouth. Its jaws were slightly parted, the wet earth of its mossy fur pressing against the coin's cold surface. I watched my own hand reach, not moving, yet I felt the pull, the sickening slide of the coin against the cat's teeth. The sound wasn't a click, not a faux clink, but a wet feu de doigt. Like a stone sinking into mud, the coin sank into the cat's mouth, the edges disappearing as if the mouth were a trapdoor. I didn't breathe. My reflection in the coin's surface still visible, still 20 the watched. The coin vanish. The cat's mouth closed over it, slowly, deliberately. Not a snap, not a twitch. The lips pressed together, the moss on its fur smoothing, the earthy scent of the floor rising. The coin was gone. The cat's mouth closed, a final twin click of dry earth meeting dry earth. No sound, no ripple, just the silence of a thing that had always been meant to be closed. The coin was inside, the cat's mouth sealed over it. The only sound the faint thud of the coin settling into the dark, wet space beneath the cat's tongue. The Polaroid blues of the walls bled into pure, sun-bleached bone, the concrete floor now a single seamless expanse of pale, dead stone. The cat's mouth stayed closed, the coin inside, the final absence.